Hi everyone! This is my Action Research project. The term Action Research is fairly new to me, but the process of Action Research is very similar to the scientific method that I used in my undergrad. My Action Research was inspired by the difficulty I had with ELL students in my last practicum. So, without further ado, I'll get right into my core values of teaching. As a future teacher, I believe that all students should be included in activities throughout the day, regardless if they do or do not have the additional ESL support. If students are struggling due to the factors they cannot control, they should be given the right amount of support throughout the school year in order to create an equal playing field for their learning. I believe it's important to be educated about students' backgrounds, religions, and cultures in order to create an inclusive and welcoming background for students that travel from overseas. This will create an environment that is comfortable for students that may feel lost in their classroom due to the language barrier and will show a sense of professional development. When I was teaching in a designated ESL school, it was increasingly challenging to find ways to accommodate these students. What was even more challenging was having multiple ELL students, as well as many students that have various needs or are on an individual education plan. There was ESL support staff that assists these students every other day for 2 periods. I did the math over a 10-day cycle, and so my concern became relevant when I realized these students only received an assistance from the ESL support staff 17% of the 10-day cycle, and that they were without professional assistance for the other 83% of the school year. The issue is that there is very little knowledge on what can be done for the teachers to help these students when the ESL support staff is no longer present. So I ended up asking myself, how can I increase my support to ELL students in a high-needs classroom in order to give them the same learning opportunity as other students? This ended up becoming my question that I wanted to research. So before I continue, I believe there are some key terms that I should clarify. The first is ELL, which stands for English Language Learner, and this refers to a student where English is not their primary language and they need some assistance to develop their English language skills. The second is ESL, which stands for English as a Secondary Language. This is a program developed to help students whose primary language is not English and to develop their English language skills. The last key term is an IEP, which stands for Individual Education Plan. This is an academic plan developed by the teacher through assessments with the input from the parents or the guardians and the student if he or she is older than 16 years of age, and it's in order to meet the needs of that student. So as I was researching, I found various resources that were useful and educational. They provided strategies for assisting English language learners in the classroom, and they also provided information on their background as learners, which is important because it is helpful to know your students and understand what type of learner he or she is. One thing I found is that it is beneficial to the student to include their culture into the lessons in order to promote inclusion and to make students feel safe in the classroom. This way, students are engaged in the lesson and the activity because they feel familiar with the content and become encouraged to express themselves. Many of the articles had helpful strategies, such as having ELL students work in cooperation with English speakers or a close peer of theirs, but also incorporating visuals and demonstrations into every lesson. One strategy I would love to implement is drawing before writing because it combines the use of visuals and comprehension. Students can connect their personalized drawings to the content to help them understand and remember vocabulary. I also found that collaboration was emphasized quite a bit and would be useful when a teacher is busy assisting other students. There was an article that mentioned the use of phonoblocks. This is a technology that uses wooden blocks and it creates up to 7-letter words. It uses color cues and 3D tangible letters when students create words, and with its connection to an iPad, students can also hear the sounds of each letter and word when the letters light up. I believe this program is great for kinesthetic and visual learners, and it also allows students to connect the sounds to what they see. It also allows teachers to assist other students while ELL students work independently on this activity. I believe this is great use of technology in the classroom and a fun and interactive way to help ELL students learn their phonics and alphabet faster. The only downfall to this strategy is not every school or classroom can have access to such a program or technology, and it is very difficult to assess or track the student's progression when using the program. Now, unfortunately, I was unable to find any articles that discussed having ELL students in the classroom with other students of high needs, but I still believe these strategies can be tweaked in such cases. Alright, so when I thought about who would be involved in this research, I knew that my participants had to be, of course, the students in my class, but with a focus on the ELL students and the peers that they are closest to, but also myself as a teacher. Other students will be observed to see what type of interactions and impact they may have on the ELL students' learning. The peers working with the ELL students may range anywhere between 1 student or 3 students, and in one class alone, there will be about 2 ELL students. But then I thought, there are other ELL students in the school, so it would be beneficial to involve other classes and teachers in the research to gather a larger sample size. In that case, I would also sample 3 classes with ELL students. So that's 1 from primary, 1 from junior, and 1 class from intermediates. I will also involve the principal, ESL support staff, and other teachers from the sample classrooms. I realize it is important to review the research ideas with the principal to make sure resources are available and that all the ethical grounds are covered. I would also have to be given permission to research and observe students in other classrooms, as well as permission from teachers to record their lessons and their strategies. The ASL support staff would also have useful information that I could consider, so it would be beneficial to include them as well. Lastly, all the research will be done in one school, preferably a designated ESL school, and it will also be done during school hours. As I was reading articles and doing my research, I realized the focus was less on helping ELL students with a high needs class, but directed more towards collecting data on a few methods that could be implemented to increase the success of my ELL students. So I chose to focus on visual aids and collaboration with peers. So the 2 qualitative data sources I chose to use are anecdotal notes with observations and teacher journal. And the quantitative data source I'm using is quizzes with pictures. I thought anecdotal notes would be a great data source because I could take notes after the ELL student has been paired with a peer that they work well with. I will note things such as how well the student collaborated, how much they are conversing in English, so for example, 10 minutes in a 50-minute period, and also whether the ELL student is trying to solve the problems with minimal support or a lot of support. This will give me a greater understanding of how beneficial the collaboration is to advance the ELL students' learning. Also, I will keep a teacher journal, and it will be used to keep a record of what subject is being taught and the main vocabulary words that the ELL student should focus on. This journal will also be a way to keep track of the student's progress, what strategies worked and which did not, and the next steps for both my instructions and the student's learning. If there are more than 1 student, the page will then be divided accordingly. I decided also to use a quiz that heavily uses pictures. It essentially will have a picture of the vocabulary word, and students will have to write this word in English. They will also be given the option to write it in their own language as well, but will be tested on the English word. The pictures will involve words learned in class, so this will be tracked using my teacher journal. And it will test to see if the students will be able to orally identify the words and use written skills to record their answer. I thought the best approach would be to complete the quizzes with the teacher, and once the student feels confident, then they'll be able to complete these quizzes independently. So I selected these 3 data sources because each involves peers in the class, the student independently, and the teacher's perspective. I am able to collect data from more than 1 source using triangulation. Taking anecdotal notes through observation allows me to observe how students get along and work with the ELL student. I'm able to see the advancement of the ELL student after each quiz is to show if the student is able to communicate independently or requires more ESL support or peer support. Lastly, collecting data and reflecting through the teacher journal allows me to organize my own methods, data, and thoughts in order to analyze and determine the next steps. These different methods and approaches to collecting data make my results more reliable and valid. Beginning with the quizzes, this will ensure reliability through scoring and observation. I can collect data based on the student progress or the difficulty of the quiz, which will then allow me to compare previous results that are consistent and therefore reliable. My qualitative data will be collected through anecdotal notes and teacher journal to show me day-to-day observations that are descriptive and form valid sources. Both data sources will allow me to collect data that are believable based on the tracking method, and it will allow each daily note to flow together in order to analyze them easily. So then I thought to myself, what would the timeline look like? For example, I'm using anecdotal notes, teacher journals, and quizzes, but how often will I be doing this and collecting the data, and exactly when? So I figured anecdotal notes, which involves classroom and collaborative peer observations, can be completed weekly from October to January. If I do teacher journals, this will in fact be collected daily, which includes what were the lessons for the day and the main vocabulary words learned. And then I will complete a weekly entry, which is talking about the progression of the student. And then last, the quizzes that use visuals and pictures and the vocabulary words, this will also be collected weekly from October to January as well. One important part of research is considering the ethical standards. In other words, keeping participants and school confidentiality, which I do believe is important if you're collecting personal data. So in order to ensure confidentiality and privacy, I will use the following strategies. I will keep students' names anonymous and use pseudonyms, only ones that I can interpret and understand. I will have all files locked away, either in a cabinet or in a safe cupboard. I will remove the school's names from the files and the collected data. I will always ask permission from students and teachers to use certain data collected. Students and teachers will be aware of the work that is being completed without giving details of their research. Parents and guardians will also be notified through online communication of letters sent home or of the research that is being completed and how this will affect their child or children. Lastly, if there is data no longer being used, I will dispose of it appropriately, which means either shredding it or deleting it on file. So unfortunately for this project, we were unable to go into the field to implement these strategies and collect data. But I do believe it is important to think about how we'd analyze the data we get from these data sources before collecting the data. If not, it would be a little confusing if you realize later that you're not collecting the data appropriately. To begin, I thought maybe for the quizzes, there would be a consistent number of vocabulary words each week. In order to analyze the data, a progression chart will be created to show the student's growth in learning vocabulary words. Therefore, each week we can set a goal, and the ELL student may work towards or surpass that goal. It will show how well this method is working based on whether there are improvements in the number of words that the student gets right over the weeks, or if there's little to no change and an adjustment has to be made. This would be a great visual not only for data collection, but for the student's encouragement. In order to analyze the data from the anecdotal notes, I decided to use the coding method, which will be based on how well the student collaborates with the peer, how much they are conversing in English, so again the example of 10 minutes in a 50-minute period, and if the ELL student is trying to solve problems with minimal support or a lot of support. This will be rated starting from low, mild, and high, and an overall score will be given. If the student is ranked mainly high, then we can interpret the data to say that the strategy is working. Then we have the teacher journal. It will be categorized into sections such as lessons, main vocabulary words, the strategies that worked, and the next steps so that it's easier to interpret and analyze. It will also be easier to flip through the entries to analyze student progression throughout the days and weeks. For multiple students, I would assign different colors and sections of the book to make it easier to organize the individual's information. Overall, this was an interesting journey where I learned a lot of new things. Completing an Action Research project has increased my knowledge on the essential steps required to conduct research in the most accurate way possible. Since this research question was one that was developed in my teaching practicum, I do believe the results of my finding can lead me to the next steps, which include implementing what I've found when I encounter ELL students in my future classes. I do believe that there are many great strategies found in articles, some of which could easily be implemented in the classroom. When completing Action Research, I also noted that the steps on implementing the strategies and analyzing the data is sometimes overlooked. Thus, by studying the steps of Action Research, it allows everyone to develop this mindset and these strategies that they can then follow when they are having a question or a problem. Going forward, if there are any problems experienced in the class or even questions involved with the staff, I believe taking an Action Research approach would not only be beneficial to myself, but to those that are involved in the research or those that may encounter similar questions or challenges. I know I will be using Action Research with any future problems or challenges as a teacher.